since his election in 2010 in the United States Senate. He has been a champion of free enterprise. He is one of the leading thinkers when it comes to free trade, and with our senior senator has changed the culture of Washington, D.C. You don't hear anyone talking so much about earmarks anymore, and that's because of the two gentlemen on stage. I want to just thank Senator Flake and his team. They have worked very closely with state leaders, with chambers across the state when it comes to issues affecting Arizona, such as water, such as energy. It is a great privilege to have representation in D.C. that is always available. Without further ado, our terrific junior senator, U.S. Senator Jeff Flake.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you all. And I appreciate so much the work that the Chamber does. And I appreciate the large crowd here today. You know, I was born on the 31st of December, 15 minutes before midnight. And for most of my life, my young life, I thought that all the parties and everything that happened were for me. I just had that same realization about these cameras here today. No, it's my office had a softball team in Washington this year. Our name was the Other Senator from Arizona. Such is my lot in life. But I sure appreciate being here. Let me just give a brief update about what's going on in Washington. Let me first talk a little about the process. The Chamber of Commerce painstakingly looks at every vote that we take and determines which of those votes has some effect on business, the ability to do business or grow the economy. And as Dick mentioned last year, there were precious few votes to actually count. Well, I'm pleased to announce that we've increased the number of votes that we take in Washington. In fact, in one day in mid-January, we had more amendment votes on the Senate floor than we had in all of last year, in one day. And so that's worthy of applause right there. And that makes a huge difference for the issues that all of you are concerned about, particularly in the area of regulation. For years now, government agencies, the federal agencies from the executive branch, have been able to basically do what they want because Congress hasn't regulated the regulators. When we just have one amendment or one vote on an omnibus bill at the end of the year without the ability to amend, we simply cede our authority to the executive branch, and that makes a huge difference when it comes to regulation in the financial industry, environmental policy, water issues, public land issues, you name it. It really is detrimental when Congress hasn't taken its traditional role, and we are back to that now. We actually voted on a budget last week, and the House passed a budget as well. As we reconcile those and give the numbers to the committees, the Appropriations Committee, then we'll actually have bills, appropriations bills on the Senate floor. It's been since 1997 since we have finished all appropriation bills before the end of the fiscal year. We need to do that again, and that'll benefit all of us. A couple of other issues that are important to Arizona. Senator McCain has said that the coming century will be dominated in Arizona with discussions about fire and water. And he's right, and we need to be prepared here. Fortunately, in Arizona, we've benefited from the foresight of a great generation of leaders, a couple of generations of leaders who have planned well. The groundbreaking, the Groundwater Management Act in the 1980s really set Arizona apart, something California wishes they had done. And California is now in crisis mode. We gratefully are not, because we have planned well. But still, when you're in the midst of a 40-year drought, you're going to have issues. Senator McCain and myself and former Senator Kyle, and let me tell you how difficult it is with Senator Kyle not in the Senate and his devotion on the water issues. He settled no less than 7 Indian water settlements, giving surety to the tribes and to municipalities and other water users going ahead. But he has graciously agreed to help out in the future. So we met, myself, Senator McCain, Senator Kyle, and Governor Ducey to talk about a way forward in Arizona and how we make sure that the planning that has been done continues. Governor Ducey's agreed to take the lead role on that, and we just need to make sure, because there is going to be drought legislation coming from California, and we need to make sure that Arizona speaks with one voice, that all the stakeholders here are together so we can increase our leverage and make sure that we protect the state. So that's extremely important. We had a good forum this morning at the Morrison Institute, the Kyle Center there, talking about water. I'll be in Tucson talking about storage, and we've had a year-long conversation on the water issue. On the budget, let me just tell you, not often the good news comes on the budget. There was a bit of good news, I think, coming out of the House. That's even rarer, that good news comes out of the House. I can say that now, but I didn't used to. No, but the House did something that I think we've been waiting for and will need in the future. The so-called SGR, or doc fix, has bedeviled the Congress for 17 years now. We simply kick the can down the road, and for one more year, up the reimbursement level that we know, has to be increased to make sure that doctors can still treat patients. It's a big ticket item, and so we've never been able to find an offset. Well, the House, a couple of weeks ago, the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader sat down together, along with others, and agreed to change the formula ever so slightly to means test a portion of Medicare to pay for at least a portion of this doc fix. That may not seem like a big deal, but for Washington these days, that is a big deal. We're going to need to do that in spades moving ahead if we're going to address the budget problems that we have. If you think about it, every day now for the next decade or two, we'll have 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day. And we've got to make sure that we adjust our entitlement programs accordingly, and more important than that, we have to have economic growth. With the anemic growth that we've had over the past several years, you simply can't bridge that gap. And that's why what you do here in this room is so important, and why it's so important to have policies that support that. On foreign policy, I'll let Senator McCain address that, because I know he will anyway. But let me just mention, on foreign policy, a big deal was struck last week, or the framework for a deal with Iran. And without rendering any judgment on the deal itself, I can tell you that Congress has a role here, and Congress will not be pushed aside. The sanctions were imposed that brought Iran to the table by Congress, and Congress will weigh in on whether or not those sanctions are permanently suspended. So Congress will weigh in, and that's a good thing. But in closing, before Senator McCain comes up here and we get to questions, let me just tell you what an honor it is to serve with this man. I have been an admirer of Senator McCain my entire political life. And I still remember one of my fondest memories is when I was dealing with this earmark issue, and I had offered a number of amendments to strike earmarks, and I was getting a lot of heat in the local paper here at home for the position I was taking. And we were flying home together once, and Senator McCain got out of his seat, came over to mine, put his finger in my chest, and says, I didn't have any idea what he was going to do or what I had done to deserve this. But he just said, don't back down. Stick to it. They'll come around. And I've always appreciated that. And let me just tell you, having served in the Senate now for just over 2 years, there is no voice that is more respected in the Republican conference than John McCain. When he speaks in our luncheons that we have every week and virtually every day that we're back there, other people can talk, I can stand up and give a spiel, and you'll still hear forks tinkling and everything else, but when Senator McCain stands up, everyone listens. And that is invaluable to the country and certainly invaluable to this state. And it is just an honor to serve with him. Besides, if Senator McCain weren't in the Senate, I don't know who in the world would chew me out when I make wrong votes. I mean, it's just, somebody's got to do it. And, but I know that there may be an announcement coming here in a couple of minutes, and whichever way that goes, let me just say that it would be the greatest honor for me to still, after several more years, be referred to as the junior senator from Arizona. Thanks for having me here.
Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you for your kind words. Thank you for your friendship. Thank you for your integrity. And thank you for the brains of the outfit, Cheryl. Thank you, Cheryl, and your wonderful, beautiful family. Many of you, there are some of you that don't know that Jeff Flake was voted by one of the local magazines, newspapers in the Capitol as the best-looking member of Congress. And I've often joked that if I looked like Jeff Flake, I'd be President of the United States today. And I will not go through his many accomplishments, but two I'm very proud of. One, that working together, we were able to nominate 6 new judges, one of them the first Native American woman ever to serve on the federal bench. And there was a time when these so-called earmarks, and by the way, earmarks is corruption. There was a time when earmarks was very popular, and there was one individual who stood up against them at political cost to him because the old bulls didn't like it, but he didn't back down. And a person of his integrity, I think I'm fortunate to have as a friend and a true great United States Senator in the tradition of his great predecessor, John Kyle. So thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Glenn. Thank you, chamber members. Thank you for this well-deserved lifetime award. As I've considered whether to run for re-election, I've thought a lot about our state. I've thought about our problems and our opportunities, what we've accomplished and the work that remains, and I've also thought about what Arizona means to me. For much of my life, I didn't have a hometown. My father was a naval officer. My family lived in more places than I can recount. I became a naval officer too, and except for a longer than scheduled combat tour, I was always on the move. I was part of a tradition that compensated me in other ways for not having a safe harbor I could call home. I didn't know what I was missing until Cindy brought me to Arizona to raise our family. And in the 30-plus years that have passed since I moved here, Arizona has worked its magic on me. Barry Goldwater called Arizona, and I quote, 113,400 square miles of heaven that God cut out. He was right. I've enjoyed just about every scene of spectacular beauty our state has to offer. I've hiked Canyon de Chelly, the Chiricahuas, the Grand Canyon, rim to rim. I've rafted the Colorado. I've walked the trails of Saguaro National Monument and been struck speechless by the awe-inspiring landscape of Monument Valley. I've driven through the desert in the spring after a wet winter and been moved to tears by the beauty of desert wildflowers in bloom. I've been to every community that Arizonans carved from the wilderness and made there thrive. Places that have never stopped growing, places where opportunities were exhausted, and places that rose, declined, and were reimagined again by the hardworking, self-starting dreamers that Arizona attracts in such large numbers. I'm one of the most fortunate people in the world. and I want to thank Arizonans with all my heart for the privilege of representing our beautiful state and the people who are blessed to call it home. I'm proud to have entered public office as a foot soldier in the Reagan Revolution. And I believe today, as I believed then, in small government, fiscal discipline, low taxes, a strong defense, the God-given rights of every human being, born and unborn, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Over the last several years, Arizonans have been rightly frustrated with a wasteful, incompetent federal government bent on expanding its reach and power, from Obamacare to excessive financial and environmental regulation. I've fought against those excesses and have the scars to prove it. And I'll keep fighting. Quitting is not in my nature. Arizonans expect me, as they do all who represent them in government, to do the hard work of bringing people together, to get things done, and solve problems that can't be solved by individuals alone. I'm proud of the work that I've done for the state, and we've had a lot of success over the last few years. I've worked on issues at the Veterans Administration for years, but reports last spring about gross mismanagement and neglect at the Phoenix VA sparked a national scandal over veterans' health care unlike anything that I've ever seen before. Having listened to the families of veterans who passed away while struggling through endless wait times and mountains of red tape, I helped write and pass legislation that made some of the most significant changes to the VA in decades, including giving veterans a choice in where they receive their health care. I also led the effort to strengthen suicide prevention programs at the VA. 8,000 veterans every year commit suicide. This January, the Senate unanimously passed the Clay Hunt Suicide Prevention for American Veterans Act, a bill that I co-authored in memory of Clay Hunt, a decorated combat veteran of the Iraq and Afghanistan War who took his own life in 2011 at the young age of 28 after a difficult struggle with PTSD. We have no greater responsibility than to care for our nation's veterans, and this bill will enhance mental health care services for those who suffer from the effects of war long after they completed their tours of duty. Additionally, I worked with the Arizona leaders on the Resolution Copper Mine project in Superior. Time and again, I was stuck in the partisan minefield of Congress until last fall, where I was able to secure congressional approval to expand the mine as part of the Defense Authorization Bill. The mine is expected to produce roughly 25% of our entire nation's domestic copper supply, create about 4,000 jobs, and generate tens of billions of dollars in economic activity well into the 21st century. I worked with the defense and community leaders in the Southern Arizona Defense Alliance and the DM-50 to stop the Obama administration's misguided plan to cancel the entire fleet of A-10 Warhogs, many of which are stationed at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson. A-10 pilots and crews have played a heroic role in providing close air support to our ground troops on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan. Their mission continues today with A-10s deployed in Eastern Europe and to protect against Russian aggression, and to the Middle East to fight against ISIS. After anglers and businesses in Mojave County asked me to help to get the Willow Beach National Fish Hatchery reopened, I helped bring the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services to the negotiating table with Arizona Game and Fish and other local stakeholders to restore the trout stocking program, which supports some 1,700 jobs and $75 million of badly needed economic activity along that stretch of the lower Colorado River. On scores of other issues, from helping the Forest Service procure from the U.S. Air Force water tanker aircraft to fight wildfires in Arizona and the West, to helping small businesses that serve the Grand Canyon weather the federal government shutdown a few years ago, from helping Douglas get its cattle crossing station reopened, to helping the Snow Bowl get a permit for snowmaking equipment to extend its season, from getting legislation passed that will continue federal support for the economically vital Yuma Crossing wetlands restoration project occurring in the banks of the Colorado River, to investigating diminishing banking services throughout our border communities. I have worked hard to meet the needs of Arizonans who count on me to help them solve problems. Today, Arizonans in America are deeply worried about our nation's security as they look around and see a world on fire. President Obama's feckless policy of leading from behind has replaced Ronald Reagan's maxim of peace through strength. And all across the world, our enemies are emboldened and our friends are demoralized. Just this past year alone, ISIS took control of territory the size of Indiana in the heart of the Middle East and waged a savage campaign of death and destruction across Syria and Iraq. For the first time since World War II, a sovereign European nation was invaded and its territory seized. Russia continues to occupy Ukraine and threaten our NATO allies in Eastern Europe. Iranian aggression spread across the Middle East while President Obama's nuclear negotiations with Iran threatens to leave the Ayatollahs close to nuclear arms status, and the entire region on the brink of a nuclear arms race. China has stepped up its aggressive behavior in Asia, backed by rapid military modernization. As Henry Kissinger recently observed, the United States has not faced a more diverse and complex array of crises since the end of the Second World War. That is the entirely predictable result of a disastrous foreign policy, and while I wish I had been wrong, I saw many of these problems coming. I said Iraq would fall into chaos if we didn't leave a residual force there. I warned that if we didn't take action, Syria would descend into a terrorist safe haven that posed a threat to America. I predicted that Vladimir Putin would invade Crimea, and I've been drawing attention to Putin's malign intentions for more than a decade. For my trouble, Putin sanctioned me and barred me from entering Russia. Cindy and I cannot go to Siberia again this spring. ISIS online has called me their #1 enemy. I know I've got my faults, but when I get that kind of reaction from America's enemies, I must be doing something right. And as the new chairman of the Armed Services Committee, I've never been in a better position to help our military defeat our enemies and secure our nation. To be strong in the world, we have to stay strong at home. I know what our priorities should be because the people of Arizona have never been shy about telling me what they are. Arizonans are frustrated by the slow economic recovery. They're struggling to make ends meet and afraid the American dream is slipping away. Arizona small businesses are under assault by federal mandates like Obamacare and worried about our unsolved fiscal challenges. Arizonans are frustrated by the federal government's chronic inability to secure our southern border. Arizonans in uniform are concerned that mindless defense cuts are devastating our military and putting them at greater risk. Most of all, Arizonans worry, like never before, about the security of the country and a president who refuses to lead. These are challenges that need all our best efforts to address. So with a full heart, I ask Arizonans again for their support as I seek re-election to the United States Senate. I'm as determined as ever to deserve your trust and grateful as ever for the privilege. It is the honor of my life to serve you and our best hopes for our country, and I intend to remain worthy of that honor. No success in my life has ever come without a good fight, and there is so much worth fighting for today. I'm eager to get started and ready for whatever comes. Thank you very much. Okay, Jeffrey, go ahead.
Thank you, Senator Flake and Senator McCain. We have a few minutes for Q&A. I believe we have a couple of roaming mics, so please raise your hand if you have a question. And thank you both for the very detailed description of what's going on in D.C. And I just want to say, Senator McCain, and I say this with all sincerity, not just Arizona, not just the United States, but the world is a safer place because of the position you now hold. We need to keep you in that position. I'm sure we have some questions. Okay.
Senators, if you could you give us an update on where we stand on returning and giving the states back federal land that was outlined in the Enabling Act when we became a state? As you know, Arizona is only about 17.5% private land. For Arizona to grow, as we need to grow, we need that land back. We need to put it into production, however that may be. And I would appreciate an update on that, if you would, please.
Well, okay, it's on. In terms of turning land back, I don't think you're going to see that happen anytime soon. What we've been concerned about is making sure that we manage the federal land that we have here. And one thing that concerns us greatly is the president's the rumor that's going around that he might use the Antiquities Act to further take federal land that is we can still use for multiple uses and have access to create monument designations that will limit our ability to manage that land for economic reasons or purposes. And that's been our real concern, and particularly with regard to our water shortage as well here. We've got to manage our forests and our watersheds. And we've been having a lot of trouble getting the Forest Service and others to make sure that they partner with private industry to keep the nascent private industry that's come back now, to keep them going, because we've got to have that done to make sure that, as you mentioned, when we only have about 15% of Arizona that is privately owned, that we can have an economic base here. So it's extremely important.
Let me just add that we need to have something again that rose up in the 1980s, and that was called the Sagebrush Rebellion. We need to have all of our western states stand together and have some of this federal land turned back. What we have been seeing is in the opposite direction. What Jeff was just talking about, they want to give, quote, monument status, which means no more ranching, no more cattle, no more, except under certain circumstances, recreating even. And that's an area bigger than the state of Delaware. And what my great fear is that President Obama on his way out the door may designate that. And Jeff and I have recently met with the cattlemen, the ranchers, all the people who have multiple use of that land. And all I can say is that it's a danger. And what I'm hoping is that the next President of the United States would undo that and other damage that's already been done.
Next question. With this lighting, it's tough to see.
Oh, I'll way back here. This is a question to, I guess, both senators. Yesterday, the Secretary of Defense spoke at Arizona State University and indicated that the best way to build a good foreign policy with Asia is increased trade. What is your opinion on trading with Asia?
On what?
Trade with Asia. Let me just say that the President Obama has talked about I talked about this pivot to Asia, and that's important. I think it's proper, but that pivot to Asia won't mean anything unless we get this TPP, or Trans-Pacific Partnership legislation, or not legislation, this trade agreement done. In order to get that, we've got to have TPA, or Trade Promotion Authority, to give the President the authority to finish that trade deal. And the problem has been the President really hasn't put much muscle behind he says he favors it, but he really hasn't come to the Hill and twisted any arms to get that TPA done. Republicans will supply probably 80% of the votes to get that across the finish line. We just need the President to work on 20% of the other party. But that's extremely important to get that TPP done, particularly for our Southeast Asia countries and many others.
60% of the world's economy now is in the Asia-Pacific region, and it's continuing to increase. And if we don't have free trade agreements with these countries, then the Chinese economy and China will continue to dominate even more and more of the Asia-Pacific. I just remind you, there was people who didn't agree and fought against the North American Free Trade Agreement. Right now, the United States of America, Arizona does more business with Mexico than Mexico does with Spain. And look at what it's done for our economy. We have to have this free trade agreement, or we're going to be crowded out of the Asian markets, and that's just the reality.
Great answers. Next question, please.
Senator, coming closer to home, there are many in the Republican Party who are attempting to close the Republican primary. I heard a speech from Helen Purcell last night, who said that most of the independent votes are Republicans. Your thoughts on the attempts to close the primary, sir?
Well, as I said earlier, Jeff and I are both Reagan Republicans, although he was much too young, as you know, at the time. And the one thing about Ronald Reagan was that he wanted a big tent. Ronald Reagan wanted to be inclusive. Ronald Reagan said the 11th commandment is that you don't speak ill of your fellow Republican. Ronald Reagan said, and I quote, "If a fella is with me 80% of the time, then he's fine with me." We want as many people into our tent of the Republican Party as we can possibly get. And so to exclude anyone, in my view, from supporting Republicans and Republican candidates would be in direct contravention to, I believe, the greatest president of the 20th century.
I just say it's nice to hear that that voice that I used to hear on the radio on Sunday night, back now in the legislature, Jay Lawrence. I agree with Senator McCain.
Next question, please. While we're waiting, I saw a recent release, I think it came out in the last couple days, on I-11. I would love to hear just the latest on transportation. And we have the Chamber's Transportation Group, Accelerate Arizona, here as well.
Well, sure. We're supporting legislation introduced by Dean Heller and others to have the I-11 designation not just go north from Phoenix through Nevada, but also south to make sure that's a corridor that benefits the entire state of Arizona. So that will allow ADOT and the federal government to set priorities as well. We obviously need a better infrastructure if we're going to take advantage of the trade that Senator McCain mentioned that benefits the state and the country tremendously.
A lot of people don't know in Arizona that in Texas they are doing everything they can to attract this north-south traffic. And we need to have ports of entry that are large, but we also need that artery that could bring these goods and services directly north to Phoenix and on to Las Vegas and even further over time.
We have time for about one or two more questions. Okay.
Senators, I want to start by thanking you for your leadership in sponsoring the Keep the Promise Act. And I know that that act has now had a hearing in the Senate for markup. I'm curious if you would comment on the ability to bring that to a vote of the Senate this year.
Don't know. It is, we have had hearings on it, and it depends on the Indian Affairs Committee and whether that comes forward. So that will need to be addressed to those on the committee. But Senator McCain and I are both sponsors of that legislation.
Any final questions? Looks like someone. Yes.
Glenn, could I, could I just make a comment? I've painted a pretty bleak picture to some degree, and it's an accurate one on the situation in the world, my friends. We're going to be fighting this ISIS for many, many years, this cancer that's spreading across the Middle East and down into Africa. And Iran is on the move. They're in 4 different countries now, and they're dominating in Lebanon and Syria, in Iraq, and Libya. So these are tough times ahead. But I'd also like to give you a little bit of a different view as well. I am very excited about the economic future of this country. We will now become energy independent. We are now energy independent. That has enormous beneficial effect and already has on our economy. We still are the most innovative and by far the most talented country in the world. All of these devices were not invented in China. They were not invented any place in the world but here in the United States of America. I recently was over in California at Venice and went to a thing called Snapchat. I don't know if many of you and I met the 25-year-old CEO. I mean, it is remarkable to see the innovation and the intelligence and the bright young Americans. So when I see the short-term challenges of our debt and our deficit and a lot of the other things, I am very optimistic about the future of America, given the things that are happening within the United States of America. It just requires the right leadership. Did you want to?
Yes, Senator McCain, I heard you talking about resolution earlier, and I don't know if you're aware that it has kind of pulled tribes apart here in Arizona, and I don't know if you know of the movement that's going on, that people that were not in agreement with the land exchange, there are a few tribal members camped there at Oak Flat, and I understand that they have a petition to try to change Congress's mind and the president's mind. I don't know if that's possible, but that's what they are trying to do. Isn't that a done deal already, so to speak?
Well, we're talking about the resolution copper. I asked for years for the San Carlos Apache leadership to sit down and talk to Resolution Copper. They refused to do so. They wouldn't even talk to them. They would not talk to them. I wanted a negotiated settlement. Probably the lowest income area of this state is out Miami, Globe, Superior area. There are very severe economic problems, and on the reservation there is high unemployment and all of the other things that go along with it. I asked time after time to sit down and talk. Refusal to talk, to me, means that I have to act on my own. So I acted on my own, and we will now have an opportunity both on and off the reservation where thousands of jobs are going to be created and people will have a good life. And whenever and whatever I look back on my political career, it will be with great pride that I was able to have this 25% of America's copper being produced here in the state of Arizona, creating thousands of jobs and billions of dollars into our economy. I couldn't be more proud.
One final question to take us home, and we have a number of state legislators here who've done a fantastic job of improving the state's business climate, tax, tort, and regulatory reform. One of the roadblocks we keep hearing about is the federal tax code. What do you believe the prospects are for some sort of improvement in the federal tax code at some point in the not-too-distant future?
I'd love to be optimistic here, but it's tough to believe that we can get any significant positive reforms done over the next 18 months. The President has insisted on that any tax reform yield a lot of new tax revenue, and I just can't see that happening. We do really need quickly, urgently, to have corporate tax reform. We're losing a lot of business that would stay here, particularly with our energy economy going so well. We could keep more here were it not for the exorbitantly high corporate tax rate that we have. But once you get into that, it quickly leads into other tax reform that we need to do as well. But I think it's probably too heavy of a lift for this Congress with this president, unfortunately. But you know where we are. We would love to move ahead.
We now have the highest corporate tax code in the world. Highest corporate taxes in the world are in the United States of America. That's not something we should be proud of. There's $1.5 trillion that's parked overseas because they don't want to bring it back to the United States to be taxed at that level. If we had a deal that I think is possible, but maybe not probable, is possible, that in return for bringing that money back to the United States and investing in jobs and employment, that would have a kind of a boost to our economy that frankly we've been searching for quite a period of time. So there's a lot of us who, Jeff and I and others, who've been trying to talk this up, and we seem to get pretty good support from the other side of the aisle, except that they are making demands as to exactly how that money that comes back is used. We just want to, frankly, give it to the people that create jobs in this country. Could I also say, everyone in this room contributes to our economy and contributes to giving young Arizonans a chance to improve their lives and have a job and education. And my gratitude is with you today, and I cannot thank you enough. And when you come to Washington to visit your money, be sure to come and see us so we can hear firsthand how we can best serve you.
On that note, Senators McCain and Senator Flake, thank you so much for visiting with us today.